So how do you build one of the richest countries on Earth on a tiny little island that has, well, zero natural resources, and do it all in just one generation? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right? Well, this is the improbable and absolutely true story of Singapore. So this is Singapore's founder, Kuan Yew. And what you're seeing here is him on national television back in 1965, and he's crying. But, these are not tears of joy. They are tears of absolute dread. Why? Because his country had just been kicked out of Malaysia, and he was completely convinced it was doomed to fail. And honestly, he had every single reason to be terrified. Let's dig in, because Singapore was born into a crisis that, from the outside, looked completely and utterly hopeless. I mean, just look at this. The odds were stacked impossibly high. Singapore had literally nothing. No oil, no timber, no minerals, nothing. They didn't even have enough fresh water for their own people. There was massive unemployment. They were surrounded by neighbors who were, let's just say, suspicious. Oh, and they had no army to defend themselves. And on top of all that, deep racial tensions simmering just below the surface. This was a country that by any rational measure just shouldn't have existed. So you have to ask, how in the world did they end up in this mess? Well, a quick look back at their history shows they'd pretty much always been a strategic pawn for somebody else. For more than a century, it was a really important British trading post, a prized possession. But then came World War II, and that sense of security was just completely shattered when Japan invaded from the one direction nobody thought was possible, from the jungle, by land. So after the war, Singapore tried to secure its future by merging with its neighbor to form Malaysia. But that dream lasted all of 2 years before they were kicked out because of intense political and racial conflict. And that brings us right back to 1965. So you have this impossible list of problems, right? And Kuan Yew's government came up with this incredibly audacious strategy. When they asked themselves, okay, which crisis do we solve first? Their answer? Well, it was simple. All of them. At the same time. Okay, so first things first. They started with the most basic problem imaginable. Water. Seriously, Singapore just did not have enough water to survive on its own. It was completely dependent on Malaysia, the very same neighbor that had just kicked them out. Not a great position to be in. So the plan was radical: achieve total water self-sufficiency. They started building reservoirs and catchment areas all over the island. They even passed laws saying that every single building's roof had to be designed to collect rainwater. And then they poured a ton of money into desalination. That's the tech that turns seawater into drinking water. And you gotta remember, back then, this was seen as almost science fiction. Okay, so that's problem number one, water. What about problem number two? How do you build an entire economy from scratch when you have absolutely nothing to sell? Well, at a time when most developing nations were all about being self-sufficient, putting up trade barriers, Singapore did the exact opposite. They zigged when everyone else zagged. The strategy was to become the most business-friendly place on the planet. We're talking zero tolerance for corruption, super low taxes, and basically a giant flashing neon sign inviting foreign companies to come in and use them as a stable, reliable bridge between the East and the West. But you can't build a world-class economy if your people are living in overcrowded, unsanitary slums. It just doesn't work. The very foundation of the nation had to be rebuilt, and I mean that literally. So the government launched one of the most ambitious public housing programs ever. But here's the absolute masterstroke, the genius part of the plan. They also created something called the Central Provident Fund, or CPF, which was basically a forced savings plan. And then, get this, citizens could use their own mandatory savings to buy these brand new government-built homes. This wasn't just a handout. It did more than just provide housing. It gave every single citizen a tangible asset, a real financial stake in the success of their own country. And the results? They were absolutely staggering. Within a single generation, over 80% of all Singaporeans were living in public housing that they owned. Think about that. From slums to homeownership for 80% of the population. It was a complete transformation of their society. Now, with no oil, no minerals, no nothing, Kuan Yew recognized that Singapore's only true resource was its people. And so that asset had to be developed, big time. The education plan was just incredibly pragmatic. First, build schools for everybody. Then, make English the official language for business and school. Why? To immediately plug Singapore into the global economy. But at the same time, every student was also required to learn their mother tongue, so Chinese, Malay, or Tamil. The end goal was brilliant: create a highly educated bilingual workforce that could do business with anyone, anywhere in the world. Okay, that brings us to the final massive problem: pure survival. How could a tiny island nation, what one Indonesian leader dismissively called a little red dot on the map, possibly defend itself against much, much larger neighbors? Well, Kuan Yew's strategy was pretty stark. He summed it up with this incredible analogy: Singapore had to become a poisonous shrimp. See, the goal wasn't necessarily to win a war against a bigger fish. The goal was to make yourself so poisonous, so painful to swallow, that no one would even think about trying to eat you in the first place. Deterrence. And this wasn't just talk. They backed it up with serious action. They introduced mandatory military service for every single able-bodied male citizen. And over the decades, through focused investment and intense training, they transformed this citizen army into one of the most technologically advanced and capable militaries in all of Southeast Asia. But, and this is a big but, this incredible transformation didn't come for free. It came at a price. And achieving this kind of order and prosperity required some, let's say, very controversial trade-offs. See, Kuan Yew championed a philosophy that's sometimes called Asian values. It basically puts the good of the community way above the rights of the individual. Social harmony and order were the absolute top priorities. And in practice, what did that mean? Well, it meant really strict laws. You've probably heard that chewing gum was famously banned. It meant a tightly controlled media, and it meant there was very, very little room for any real political opposition. Now, when critics from the West would point to a lack of freedom, Lee's response was always the same: just look at the results. And you know what? In terms of the economic results, those numbers are pretty hard to argue with. Lee's model, for all its controversies, did exactly what he said it would do. It ensured Singapore's survival and then its prosperity. I mean, just look at this chart. In a single lifetime, Singapore went from what was called the third world to the first. It's one of the wealthiest nations on the entire planet. Today, its GDP per capita, the average income per person, is higher than the United States and higher than the United Kingdom, its old colonial ruler. Just let that sink in for a sec. But of course, the story isn't over. The country now faces a whole new set of impossible problems for the 21st century. Things like a rapidly aging population, a really low birth rate, an insanely expensive housing market,